The win totals are out, and up today, I've got a list of SEC teams and the number of games each one is expected to win, according to the odds, according to the people out in Vegas to put these odds out. Uh, Copious notes. Some of you ain't gonna be too happy here. Some of you aren't gonna like these. Some of you aren't gonna like these numbers. I'm gonna do this just like I did. I did this yesterday for the Pac-12. So if you're curious about the Pac-12, click back to yesterday's video. Today we'll do the SEC. We'll keep this going the rest of the week. Also, if you are on the Uncle Lou Patreon page, first of all, thank you. You guys are the real heroes. I would not be able to do this year round. I would not be able to make it in the off season if it weren't for all the support you guys give me over on the Patreon page. So huge thank you. Number two, to those of you over on the Patreon page, it's prediction time. I made a post yesterday or the day before. I'm going to start my prediction videos sometime over the next couple of weeks. So if you've been on my Patreon page for a while, you know the routine, but head over there. You'll see a post that I made about my prediction videos. In the comments section of that post, let me know which team it is you want to see me do a prediction video for. That's where I get the teams from that I do the prediction videos on, is the comment section over there on Patreon. If you are not on the Uncle Lou Patreon and you want to check it out, there's a link in the description of this video. It'll take you over to the Patreon page. You can have yourself a look around. If you choose to join the Patreon page, that would be great. Like I said, that Patreon page is the only thing that keeps my head above water, especially in the off season. So a big shout out to everybody over there. But yes, the prediction videos are coming soon. As far as what teams I will be doing, that depends on the comments I get over on the Patreon page. All right, SEC win totals. I'm going to put all the totals up on the screen in just a second, but let me make just a couple of quick comments here. The lowest win total on the board for any SEC team, Vandy at 3.5. And I'm telling you right now, this might be the best bet on the board. I would take Vandy over 3.5 wins. Don't even really have to think about it. I agree that Vandy's not a great team and may end up being the worst team in the SEC again. I still think they're winning over 3.5 games in 2023. The team with the highest projected win total, Georgia, at 11.5. So you got Georgia on the top, Vandy on the bottom. 11.5 wins, the expected number for Georgia. 3.5, the expected number for Vandy. How can it be half, you ask? These are betting numbers. So if you see a number on Vandy of 3.5, you're either betting that they're going to win more than 3.5 games, which of course would be 4 or more, or less than 3.5 games, which of course would be 3 or less. That's why sometimes you see a half a number here. Half a number here on these win totals. I think there's several good bets on the board here for SEC win totals. I think there's some overreactions to some things that happened last year that are represented in these win totals. Well, let's just put them up. We'll just put them up. We'll go through them like I did yesterday in alphabetical order. Here you go. All right, this is going to be in alphabetical order. I thought about doing it in division, breaking it down by divisions. The SEC and the Big Ten are the only two conferences left to still have divisions. The Pac-12 did away with them last year. The ACC is doing away with them this year. The Big 12 never really had them to begin with. So it's just the SEC and the Big Ten that have divisions anymore, and those are going away too with conference expansion. But anyway, I decided to just do it in alphabetical order, just like I did the Pac-12. So we'll start out with Alabama, and they're listed at 10.5 wins. That's the over-under. That's the expected win total for Alabama in 2023. Again, a reminder, these are regular season numbers, okay? When you look at win totals, projected win totals, over-under for wins for teams in the offseason, you're talking about regular season games. So these numbers are based on the 12-game regular season schedule, not any hypothetical conference championship game or hypothetical bowl game or playoff game or anything. It's just based off the 12-game regular season. So the betting number for Alabama, they'll win 10.5 of their 12 games. So if you think Bama's going to win more than 10.5, you'd bet the over on that. And if they go 11-1 or 12-0, you win the bet. If you think they're going to win less than 10.5 games, you bet the under 10.5. If they go 10-2 or 9-3 or 8-4 or whatever, you win the bet. That's how these numbers work. So they got Bama at 10.5. I mentioned this before about Bama for this season. The majority of what you would consider to be their more difficult games are at home in 2023. This is the opposite of last year when they lost on the road at Tennessee, on the road at LSU, nearly lost on the road at Texas. This year they get Texas at home, they get Tennessee at home, they get LSU at home. Their only real even close to difficult road game is on the road at Texas A&M, and you can decide for yourself how difficult you think that game will or won't be. But I think those are, by most people anyway, considered to be their 4 most difficult games. 3 of them they get at home: Tennessee, LSU, and Texas. So Bama's got to lose 2 or more games for the under to hit here. I've got questions about Bama like everybody else does. The quarterback, new coordinators. They're losing Jahmyr Gibbs on offense, losing Bryce Young on offense, losing Will Anderson on defense. Those were their 3 best players last year. Alabama is still loaded with talent on both sides of the ball. I think their defense may be better than what we've seen the last couple of years. Our offense, I will admit, is a huge question mark. They don't have at the wide receiver position a Devontae Smith or a Julio Jones or a Calvin Ridley or any of those elite Jameson Williams, any of these elite wide receivers that they've had over the last 7 or 8 years. They don't have any of those people right now at Bama. I think the offensive line will be okay. The quarterback situation is a complete mess. That's well documented. Running back, look, I really, really like Justice Haynes. I love Justice Haynes. I just don't, people are saying Alabama wants to go back to like pre-Lane Kiffin days when Alabama, was a run-first team, controlled a line of scrimmage, play great defense, win games 24-10. That's a great idea. You had Derrick Henry. Last time you did that, you had Derrick Henry. He was running the ball 30, 35 times a game. Their running backs don't run the ball 30 and 40 times a game anymore in major college football. They don't. They just can't hold up. Now, I love Justice Haynes, but he's a true freshman. I don't know. I think Alabama's going to be really, really good, but it just seems like some of the fans think the clock is just going to automatically get turned back to like pre-Lane Kiffin day, the Derrick Henry days. You don't have a Derrick Henry. You just don't. Plus, look at the wide receivers you had when you had Derrick. Like I said, I've got everybody, I think, has legitimate questions about Alabama offensively. That doesn't mean they can't go over this 10.5, though. Of course they could. They've got a lot of talent. It's just offensively, it hasn't really come together. At least not through the spring. Buckner, Mildew, Simpson, who's going to be the quarterback. But 10.5 is the number for Bama. Of course, they could go 11-1. Of course, they could go 12-0. They could also go 8-4, 9-3. So I think 10.5 is a pretty fair number for Bama right now, given the questions they have offensively. Arkansas, they've got it 7. I would go under here on I'm just not very high on Arkansas this year. They had a good 2-year run or so with Sam Pittman where he basically pulled them up from the gutter of the SEC. When he got there, they hadn't won an SEC game in like 2 years. They were just the laughing stock of the league. They had a couple of decent years, took a step back last year, and then this offseason, they just lost a ton in the portal in terms of players. Half the coaching staff has been turned over from last year. They do get KJ Jefferson back at quarterback, and I like him. He's a tough, gritty player. It just seems to me like Arkansas may be fighting an uphill battle this year. I can think of several teams on this list off the top of my head who Arkansas has to play that I just can't see Arkansas beating. Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. I don't know. I think it's going to be a struggle for Arkansas to get to 7 wins this year. I would lean under right now on Arkansas. Auburn at 6.5 wins. Brand new coach there, Hugh Freeze, back from the dead. By dead, I mean Liberty University. After getting blackballed from the SEC for a few years for cheating and buying prostitutes and things like that for his players. He's back at Auburn. As much as I dislike Hugh Freeze personally, he's a massive upgraded head coach over Brian Harsin, and he's an offensive genius. If they can get the quarterback situation figured out at Auburn, I think they will zoom by this 6.5 win number and win 7 or 8 games. If they don't, I think 6.5 is probably right, and Auburn will be playing Alabama the last game of the year with bowl eligibility on the line. I would lean over on the 6.5 right now, but again, got to see that offense before I feel too comfortable about that. Florida. Now, here's one that this is probably the first one I think that's going to make a fan base mad. Now, I know that there's a lot of Alabama fans who think they're going to win, over the 10.5 number, but I don't think that number is insulting or would make Alabama fans mad. Even Alabama fans know there's a lot of questions, right? Now, maybe those questions get answered, but the point is, I think Alabama fans, even if they disagree with that 10.5, it's not a disrespectful number. Same with Arkansas and Auburn's numbers. I think Florida fans are going to look at that number and feel slapped in the face. And honestly, they should. There's absolutely no reason, no excuse that Florida should ever have an expected win total under bowl eligibility. This is absolute poverty
Florida has fallen off the face of the earth. They have fallen on their face. They have stepped on the same rake multiple times, and it just keeps slapping them in the forehead over and over and over. 5.5 wins. This is absolutely abysmal. That's a lower win total than Mizzou, than South Carolina, than Arkansas, than either Mississippi school. This is just, Florida has just completely fallen off the cliff. They are no longer a relevant program in the world of big-time college football. Not today. Now, Florida could easily get back to that because of the resources they have, because of the fertile recruiting ground that is the state of Florida. They've got to get the head coach right. And I just don't think they've done that. I don't think it was right with Muschamp. I don't think it was right with McElwain. I don't think it was right with Mullen. And I don't think it's right with Sunbelt Billy Napier. I just don't think it's working. And Vegas agrees. They've got the win total in Sunbelt Billy's second year for the Florida Gators at 5.5. That is really bad. I guess I would lean over 5.5 for Florida, but not by much. I mean, maybe they do get to 6 wins. I mean, just count look, no games are guaranteed. I get it. That's why we play the games. But there are several games this year that nobody is going to pick Florida to win outside of a few delusional Florida fans, right? Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, Florida State. That's 4 games that nobody with a brain is going to pick Florida to win this season outside of Florida fans, right? You lost to Vanderbilt last season. Now, I'm assuming you'll beat them this year, but I think Missouri is going to be better. Kentucky, I think, has beaten you 3 out of the last 5 years, but I still think you're probably in a better position this year than Kentucky is. You have to play on the road at Utah in week 1. No one's picking you to win that one. It looks like 5, 6, or 7 losses, depending on, can Florida beat out of South Carolina, Kentucky, and Missouri? How many of those games can Florida win? If Florida wins all of those games, they might get to 7 wins. If they lose them all, they might be at 5 and 7 and not even make this 5.5 win total. But there you go, Florida Gators 5.5. Georgia with the highest win total in the SEC at 11.5. Georgia's going to be a huge and massive favorite in every single game they play, with the exception of maybe the Tennessee game. They'll still be a favorite in the Tennessee game, but it might not be what you would consider to be a massive favorite. But Georgia's going to be a double-digit favorite in every other game. They're going to be favored over 20 points in the overwhelming majority of those games. On the road at Tennessee late in the year. Right now, in the early lines, they're about a 7 or an 8 point favorite against Tennessee in that one. Some other potential slip-ups for Georgia. Georgia's first road game of the year is at Auburn. That can be a difficult place to play. I've already talked about Auburn, so you know how I feel about them. It comes down to the quarterback play. That'll be Georgia's first road game of the year, which means that will be Carson Beck's first road game of his career. So a potential landmine there early in the year. As far as Georgia's other opponent this year from the SEC West, it's Ole Miss, but they have to come to Athens. And Ole Miss is a running team. Nobody runs on Georgia. Hard for me to imagine Georgia losing to Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss in Athens. Missouri almost beat Georgia last year on the road. They get Missouri at home this year. Hard for me to imagine them losing that one. South Carolina, that's Georgia's first real game of the year. Georgia starts out with 2 nobody teams from the group of 5 at home, and then they host South Carolina at home, I believe, week 3. Hard for me to imagine that Georgia can't get up for their first, SEC game of the year at home. Hard for me to imagine them losing that one. To me, it pretty much comes down to either that Auburn game or the Tennessee game. Do you think Georgia will lose one of those 2 games? If you do, take the under. If you don't, take the over and cross your fingers that Georgia goes 12-0. Here's the other thing. Georgia went 12-0 in the regular season last year. They went 12-0 in the regular season the year before that. That's 2 years in a row they've gone 12-0 in the regular season. Who in the comments down below can tell me the last team that went 12-0 in the regular season 3 seasons in a row? Who can tell me who that was? I'd be interested to know. But Georgia's at 11.5. Kentucky, they've got it 6.5. That seems about right to me. Kentucky and Arkansas, to me, peaked a year or two ago, at least in terms of their current sort of run. I think Kentucky and Arkansas both right now are a little bit worse than what they were a year or two ago when both of them found themselves in the top 15 at various points during the season. I don't think they're there now. Kentucky loses Will Levis to the NFL. They do bring in Devin Leary from NC State. They also lose a running back to the transfer portal and one to the NFL. It's not that I think Kentucky's going to be bad. Stoops, is a good coach. He gets the most out of the players he has there. I just feel like Kentucky is going to take a step back in 2023 compared to where they were the last couple of years. 6.5 seems like about the right number. Mizzou at 6.5. I like the over on that. Missouri's another one. If they can get the quarterback situation figured out, I think the chances of Mizzou winning more than this number are pretty significant over the 6.5. I think they'll beat Vandy. I think they'll beat Kentucky. I think it's possible they beat Florida. The game with South Carolina, I think, could be competitive. They're going to lose to Tennessee. They're going to lose to Georgia, obviously. And then, they probably have to split their games against the West to have a chance to hit this over. But if I had to bet this right now, I would take Mizzou over 6.5 wins. Ole Miss at 7.5, I'd probably take the under. Ole Miss, to me, was smoke and mirrors last year. They started, I think, 7-0 and were ranked up near the top 10 or maybe even in the top 10. And then they lost like their last 5 games of the season. But if you just look at the way their schedule set up, it wasn't very hard to see that coming. Their 5 toughest games were their last 5 games, and they lost every single one of them. They've got 4 quarterbacks that they're trying to decide which one to use. Jackson Dart, Spencer Sanders, Walker Howard from LSU. Don't know which way they're going to go there. They lost Zach Evans. They're running back to the NFL. Judkins comes back, and he's really, really good. Their defense has been a problem for a couple of years now under Lane Kiffin. I would lean under on that 7.5. I think they probably lose to Bama again. I think they probably lose to Texas A&M and LSU. That's 3 losses. I think they lose to Georgia. That's 4. Pick any other random team, and that would be 5 losses. That would put them at 7-5. All they got to do is sort of one surprise loss there would put them at 7-5. But not as high on Ole Miss this year as I have been the last couple of years. South Carolina at 6.5 is a really interesting one to me. At the risk of making myself sound like even more of an idiot, I'm going to say the same thing about South Carolina right now that I said about them last year. I think South Carolina might be a better team than they were last year, but I think they might have a worse record. I said that all last offseason about South Carolina, and it almost came to fruition. South Carolina was a better team last year than they were the year before. However, they also ended up with a better record. But that included wins against Tennessee and Clemson to close the season out. 2 top 10 teams that they beat that literally no one expected them to compete with, never mind beat. Now, that's not to take anything away from South Carolina. They went out and won the games. I sort of feel the same way about South Carolina this year, though. I know they beat Clemson last year. I think Clemson's better than them and will beat them this year. I think Georgia beats them. As bad as Florida was last year, Florida beat them 38-0 or 38-6, something like that. I think that game will be closer. But they got to play Texas A&M again. They beat Texas A&M last year for the first time since Texas A&M has joined the SEC, and they play every year. So A&M had beat them like 8-9 years in a row until last year, and that was in Columbia. South Carolina's got to travel to Texas A&M this year. They play North Carolina in week 1. That's a 50-50 game in my book. If Drake May gets hot and that offense North Carolina gets rolling, I don't think Spencer Sanders can keep up with Drake May in a shootout. I don't. I really don't. I think that's going to be a good game. So you've got the North Carolina game, the Georgia game, the Clemson game. Those are 3 games that South Carolina obviously could lose. Texas A&M would be a 4th loss. They lose 2 more, whether that's to Florida and Mizzou, Florida and Kentucky, Kentucky and Mizzou, whoever it happens to be. Then South Carolina's sitting there at the end of the year at 6-6, which would be under the 6.5. Tennessee's at 9.5 wins. Now, last year, my best bet was to take the over on Tennessee. Tennessee's win total at this time last year was 7.5. And I told anybody who would listen to take the over on Tennessee. And of course, they soared way past the 7-win mark. 9.5 is a little trickier because, of course, they play Georgia and Alabama every single year. I know they beat Alabama last year. That was at home. This year, they got to play Alabama in Tuscaloosa, but they get Georgia in Knoxville, right? If they split with Georgia and Alabama, and it doesn't matter which one they beat and which one they lose to, if they split with Georgia and Bama, they're going to go over this 9.5 wins. If they lose both of those games, then it gets tricky, right? Because if they lose to Georgia and Bama, that's 10-2. Then all they got to do is lose just any one other game, and that puts them under the 9.5 win mark at 9-3. So where could that other third loss potentially come? Well, they lost to South Carolina last year, but again, that was on the road in a weird game. I don't expect that to happen again in Neyland. On the road at Florida, it's hard for me to. I know the recent history between Tennessee and Florida's beat them something like 12 of the last 13 years or whatever it is. I would have to see Florida beat Tennessee for me to believe it could happen. I just don't see it happening. So I would actually take the over on Tennessee, even at 9.5 wins again. I would take the over. I don't think they're going to lose to Georgia and Bama, but it's possible. But even if they do lose to both of those teams, I just don't know who else is beating them. They do have to play Texas A&M. That's a tricky game there, but it's in Neyland, which is a huge advantage. I would lean the over on Tennessee, 9.5 wins. Texas A&M 7.5, I would go over that as well. I think this is an overreaction from how bad they were last year when they went 5-7. They're not losing to an App State this year. I don't see it happening. They play Miami early in the year. I think they probably beat Miami. As far as other teams in the SEC West, I think they're better than both the Mississippi teams. I think they're better than Arkansas. That's 4 wins plus Miami 5 wins. I think they're probably better than Auburn. I think they're probably better than South Carolina. You're already up to 6 or 7 wins there. I would take the over on Texas A&M. I think they're going to get back to their norm of 8-4, but I would take the over on Texas A&M. Vandy at 3.5. I've already told you what I think about that. I think it's the best bet on the board. I would take Vandy over 3.5 wins. I think they win 4 or 5 games for sure. LSU at 9.5 wins and Mississippi State at 6.5 wins. LSU at 9.5. Look, it kind of reminds me of Tennessee at 9.5. Tennessee's got a chance to win their division. LSU's got a chance to win its division. It's going to come down to a couple of games. For Tennessee, it's Georgia, Bama, and to a lesser degree, Texas A&M. And for LSU, it's going to come down to the Bama game, the Texas A&M game, and the Tennessee game. If you're LSU or Tennessee and you win 2 of those 3 games, you're winning your division. If you're LSU or Tennessee and you lose 2 of those 3 games, you're coming in second in your division. It's that simple. I would take the over on LSU and 9.5 wins, though. I would take the over. Mississippi State at 6.5. I would take the under. Hate what happened to Mike Leach. They have now promoted their defensive coordinator to head coach, entirely changing up the offensive philosophy. Will Rogers is still there, but instead of throwing the ball 60 times a game, he's going to do things a lot more normal and throw it 30, 35 times a game, more of a running team with defense problems. They don't have the players for that. I just think it's going to be a rough year for Mississippi State. I would take them under the 6.5. There you go. 2023 preseason win totals for every team in the SEC. Let me know down below which one of these is the best bet, over or under what team's win total do you think is the best bet on the board? Tell me what you think about your team, too. Do you think they got it about right? Try to be objective. Do you think they got it about right? Do you think they're way off? Let me know. And let me know which team or which conference you want me to do next. Have a good morning.